welcome to the Product Quest podcast, where Jan Vermouth, Jonathan Edwards, and myself, Scott Burleson, are on a quest to better understand innovation, marketing, and product development. In this episode, we continue our conversation with Jan Schmiedgen. If you missed the first half, I might recommend starting there first. Jan is an expert in design thinking and conducting workshops. And we pick up the action with Jonathan asking a question about the core components of design thinking.
Right. I think we've touched upon, like you've thrown out little ideas around what is design thinking. I think that's kind of the background discussion today. I mean, we talked about co-creating solutions and problems. We talked about sticky notes. We've talked about all sorts of different things, prototypes. I wonder if this is maybe a good time to rather than define design thinking, just say for you, what are the core concepts for innovation? Like, what are the core attitudes or tools? So we've not talked about the double diamond yet. I think so. That's one thing. How does that fit in? What are for you really the important things? I think you did mention one. So the co-evolving problem and solution is definitely an interesting one. But maybe we can just summarize this right now.
Yes, of course. Maybe I can even share my screen for those who watch this, and for those who listen to it, we can just talk about it. So in general, for me, design thinking is kind of a set of procedures and problem-solving behaviors that we as designers, most of the time, I would have to say industrial designers, not the communication designers, bring along with us. Yeah. So we have a certain way to think. I try to avoid this mindset word all the time because I struggle with it a little bit. But this set of procedures.
Anyway,
there are lots of stories for it. So that's what I would say is design thinking. We can dive a little bit into it. I share my screen in a sec about it. But in general, what the concept has become out in the wild is this team-based methodology for the creation of user-centric innovation concepts. That's what it has become. And that's at least our view on the whole thing. And why do I say our view? There are lots of discourses on design thinking. There's the design discourse itself, and there's an academic discourse, and then there's the managerial discourse, the management discourse. And they all have a different view on it because they discover different things about design thinking that are new to them and helpful to them. Again, what's the job to be done? So what we did is, in order to be even able to connect with our clients and to have a common ground to start from, we created a glossary on our website. And I just opened that here and share it because it's so good to explain it just with it. And our way of looking at it is because we found it more useful than the people process space explanation, is this. We say that design thinking, consists of the interconnection of practices, and this could be the process. There could be the double diamond now, with the diverging and converging working phases.
I was just going to say, usually, design thinking is this, or usually, whatever that means, it's empathize, define, ideate. So that is design thinking, but it seems like that's only that's 1/3 or a part of how you understand.
Exactly. The thing is, again, also these practices are a mashup, and they are stolen from all kinds of professional fields and put together into this codification. And this is now the Potsdam way of presenting it. There are also lots of other ways. You have the analysis synthesis model, which resembles this learning cycle from David Kolb. That's a different representation of it, and so on and so forth. And in there, all these practices, if you zoom in from the different fields and the different domains. Engineers, if they build prototypes, they follow certain things. You could have within design thinking, when you build a prototype and it's a more complex one, you could use Scrum, for example. Okay, so you steal that and put that together. But Scrum could also use design thinking. Let's say if they go to users and build a little experiment. So the question is, what is what? It's this Russian doll discussion we have all the time, also in these different circles. So we just call it practices to make it easier. So we help ourselves everywhere and put it together, and now this has become the dominant codified process. This would be the practices. These practices are heavily influenced by the mindset we bring along with. There it is again, this word, but I rather like to call them principles, because in a mindset there's always, that also implies sometimes values, and you don't have to necessarily accept certain things and live with certain values. But you can work according to principles. There are lots of people who do design thinking, even though this would never be a lifestyle to them. And so we rather call the principles, and there we emphasize all these things, like the usual suspects. Let's go down here, there you can see them. For example, experiment permanently. Yeah? Move between the construct and the concrete and the abstract. This is the build to think. Navigate ambiguity. So being fine with ambiguity and standing it. So also keep be patient and stay in the problem space before jumping to solutions prematurely. This is a big problem we have all the time. And all the other principles. There are different models out there. Most of the time, what is heavily emphasized if you talk about design thinking is the user-centeredness, the prototyping, the iteration, and so on and so forth. So depending on what model you use or what school of thought you subscribe to, these principles might differ. But you have these principles. Okay, they definitely influence the process, but these principles also need to be supported, or they support what we call techniques. Other people would call them tools or methods. And there it's really all the usual things that we used. There are all these toolkits out there. It could be all the brainstorming techniques, could be all these tools like user journey mapping, could be the value proposition canvas, the business model canvas, and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Okay. So it's these three things, just to repeat. So it's practice, which is something like the method or an approach or whatever. So in a broader sense,
processes that you configure yourself. This process is very prescriptive here, but in a real design thinking project, you configure your own process anyways. You don't follow slavishly these bubbles. Yeah.
Okay. So practice, principles, mindset principles, and techniques, and all these three things together are what make up kind of a design thinking way.
Exactly. However you see, this is very generic, because this is a deconstruction framework. I don't remember from whom it was. Maybe it was even Edward Steaming. But this is something you can apply to everything. You can put a lean startup over it from anything. So the question is, what's behind all these dimensions in the end?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I was just wondering, on your T-shirt it says always run a changing system, and of course,
yes.
I mean, it took me 45 minutes, but now I realize, of course, the other one is never change. Never change your running team or never change your running system. So it's kind of a play on this. And so is that one of the principles, or is that an additional one?
That has nothing to do with design thinking general. I mean, it has, because in order to change a system, you have to intervene. I would say poke the system, see how it reacts, and only then you can see if it's sensible or
if it makes sense. Yeah.
Your intervention that you do with the system, because again, problem and solution co-evolve. So in a way, yes, we could say it's part of design thinking, but it has to do with something else. It has to do with innovation systems. Maybe we can talk about it by the end of the podcast.
Okay.
So maybe if we can just, I think, firstly for listeners, I think you should definitely go and visit this page on Codify. It's really nicely done and a lot of information here. So it's really nice. Recommend it. Jan Vermuth was talking about how he retained the post-its and how he didn't like that necessarily, or that's what stuck out for him. For me, I always, in my lack of knowledge of design thinking, I always associated it with process. So what you call design thinking practice. And I always thought, okay, what is the philosophy? And I mean, as the listeners know, we are all three kind of into this jobs to be done framework. And this offers really a framework, a lens, a way of seeing the world. And it's not really a mindset. It's really a kind of a philosophy about how things work somehow, or a theory about how things work. And this is always the thing that I never quite understood in design thinking. What is, I mean, how do we understand the notion of desire, how do we understand that, do we make things that people want, products or services that people want? What does it mean to want something? I mean, I get the feeling this notion never appears in design thinking, but as I have the opportunity to talk to an expert, I'd love to ask that question.
I mean, design thinking claims, you remember this Venn diagram, the risk dimensions: desirability, viability, feasibility. Mm-hmm. And depending with whom you ask, they add all kinds of things. Today's sustainability, or others contextuality or strategy fit or something like this. Because there are risk dimensions, you need to de-risk. And design thinking plays very well in the desirability risk dimension, and a little bit also in the feasibility. That's what it claims. And now to answer your question, the thing is, what we always have to say I don't know if it answers the question, but it just comes to mind. We always say to our clients in projects that it's not important that the people are experts for their daily life. They cannot tell you what the solution will be, the best solution. And they can also not express their needs in such a way that I don't want to use the word latent needs or something here, but they cannot. It's hard for them to express it in such a way that it's totally clear what they need. Sometimes you have to build a solution, test with them, and see if their life gets easier. But that they immediately recognize, and then you meet their needs. And that's the thing. That's the power about this prototyping in design thinking, that you can uncover needs, or if you meet or have you met needs by presenting a prototype or putting a prototype in front of them. I don't know if this answers the question, but that comes to mind.
Well, it kind of goes back to the discussion we had previously about deciding on the direction to go in when you're prototyping, especially when you're testing for desirability, which is the tricky one. I think, it's the one you need to get right, because otherwise all the rest doesn't really matter. If there's no desire for what you build, then forget it. So I think it kind of throws us back to this. How do you decide what is the philosophy to tell you that tells you or gives you a direction as to what it is that you should be building? That's always what I felt was kind of lacking in design thinking. And I wondered what.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, what we do is, and what design thinking is very powerful at, is visualizing the context of the user or the chooser that we design for. So we have all these artifacts on the wall. We have photos, we have videos, we have the journey maps with all the struggles that they have. If you now would talk in, for example, in job to be done terminology, and the forces that push them forward, that hold them back, things like that. Yeah, depending what tools we use. We also use job to be done, but honestly not as deep as you do. And that helps us to understand, especially if we have a sponsor user with us in the team. First of all, we can feel from how she reacts whether we really captured the whole experience, depending on what our scope is. And then later on, I don't know if that answers the question, but then later on we we build something, intervene in exactly this context, and see how people react. Of course, we do not have, and that's what I really admire about jobs to be done. We do not have the qualitative statements before that, and then can later on use them, ask quantitative questions on them and validate them. That's also the thing. That's what I would say. What makes people very uncomfortable with design thinking work, that we have a very small number of people, a small n. For example, with testing, this could be 12 people. Also with interviews, usually, and the way we try to de-risk later a bit more quantitatively is then that we go into a different learning cycle with more what it's more a lean startup thing with quantitative experiments, for example, where we also ask for willingness of pay, things like that. There's also a big discussion: is it still design thinking, is lean startup? I don't care. It's the next round of experiments, the next escalation. So we always try to get signals. So maybe the philosophy is very basic. We try to get positive signals from our users in a very qualitative way that this is a solution that might fit them, so that we have problem solution fit especially.
Yeah,
go on.
It was just exactly with what sort of my question and sort of observation was, in that so if we start with I don't know if you call it empathy, but whatever the initial customer interviews with design thinking, is it fair to say that it's standard, or you're fairly comfortable with purely qualitative methods, let's say high percentage of the time, to understand the customer, as opposed to needing quantitative data? Would that be a fair statement?
Well, in projects, no, no, I wouldn't say that, because in project, I mean, in a learning experience, you don't have the time to do quantitative research. But for example, in projects, you also do. It can be so different. You start with questionnaires. You mix it. It's mixed methods, definitely. However, I mean, it's a good question. If you don't have a professional user researcher on the team who studied anthropology, ethnography, whatever, you have a problem, because we don't have a very structured, widely distributed, that everyone knows, way to inventory needs. And Job to be Done has provided a great answer to that. And this is why over the years we also were very interested in that and tried to see how can we incorporate it into design thinking, because what Job to be Done brings with it is, and that's what's really cool, a grammar to formulate the need statements in a very structured way. And we didn't have that before, at least not to my knowledge. And suddenly you are able to resonate more with very structured people. I observed it with mathematicians, engineers, and so on, chemists. They liked it way more than the fuzzy, don't you feel the emotional component of this need? Yeah,
by the way, there's judgment even in that question at all. In fact, we've talked to two folks already, fantastic interviewers, and they highly rely on qualitative methods, and so there's no judgment in that question whatsoever. Just really trying to understand. But you're saying that if for a project, it is more common for you to do some quantitative work also before beginning your cycles of prototyping. Is that right? Okay.
Both also in the so-called understanding phase, the first bubble, let's say, of the Potsdam design thinking model.
Right.
There sometimes you have to do normal desk research, very normal business intelligence work. Of course, you need to understand the big picture first. Yeah.
I think that's really important to say. I mean, I think this is really a difference between, at least from my perspective, how design thinking is perceived, and then, because you get these half-day workshops and you kind of run through the method, but then there is, if you really do, as you distinguish them, if you really do a project, it seems like that's just it's a generic kind of steps, but then it can really be, the tools in there can differ. Jobs to be done can be a part of it, and so on. And I think that's really is important to emphasize.
Exactly. Again, you will realize that if someone says, and it will be a lie if someone says, solve this problem or create a new business model in 2 days, with design thinking, you know, he's lying. And this is then the project design thinking that it can be the external consultancy for some reason wants to sell you, but it's not true.
I love that you say this, by the way, because I think there's people running around who sell, and I really think it's kind of a dishonest. Well, anyway, so
yes,
important
definitely
stuff takes time. Like
yes, exactly.
So actually, I mean, as you say, I think people who have more of an engineering mindset might be attracted to something like jobs to be done. And I actually have come to the understanding quite recently that there are, you can probably distinguish different schools or approaches to innovation or design, and there's two very big general categories, I would say, or there are more than two, but there's at least one, and the other I'm not quite sure what it is yet. But there's one which is what I think jobs to be done falls into is kind of focusing on goals, problems, and solutions. So it's goal directed, and then you have all the people who don't like, for example, jobs to be done, don't feel comfortable. They don't like this idea that you can start with goals. And I've been really trying to find arguments against jobs to be done quite a lot lately. And I find it quite difficult to be honest. But I think now this dichotomy, I've now finally kind of understood where the problem lies. It's in this goal thinking. And actually, if we go back to the first articles in design thinking, so the original, the Rittel and Weber articles called Dilemma in General Theory of Planning, he criticizes exactly this. He talks about wicked problems and how we can't solve this in a goal with a problem solution mindset. Well, Richard Buchanan talks about this also in the later articles, all these seminal design thinking articles. And also there's this effectuation approach, which Sarasvati just got a prize for lately. I'm not quite sure which one, which is also not really goal directed. The idea is you start from where you are and try and explore. And I think this is the big like line in the sand. It's like, okay, are you going for goals, or are you trying to define goals, or are you doing something else, some other approach? And I'm still trying to wrap my mind around what is that other thing, because just naturally I fall in the goal space just because that's the way I think. But I mean, I don't know what you guys think about that. I mean, is this something that resonates with you? Or
if you want to say something, I have something, but I'm also happy to give you the. I don't know if it's the same, because I read quite a lot about jobs to be done. I know about the schools of thought and so on and so forth. However, I'm not an expert in it. Definitely not deep. But the way we usually apply them, and I like to understand them, is always that we look at the desired and undesired outcomes. Is that also goal related, or what you would say is part of the goal school, or is that something else?
I definitely would say it is. Yeah. I would say it is. And yeah.
Good.
I agree. Good. I wasn't going to say so to somebody else spoke first, but yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah. Okay, good. Because whatever you do, I talked about these levels beforehand, design thinking or design 1.0, communication problems, 2, service, process, whatever problems, design 3.0, these intervening in organizations and systems, and 4.0, planet, communities, and so on and so on and so forth. It's called. I just used that one. There are many. Buchanan also has this metrics and so on and so forth. There are many of these models. I just used that one because in LinkedIn people use it quite often because there's G.K. Van Petter from Humantific in New York who likes to post about that everywhere. Yeah. So it's a nice way to look at it. And the thing is, now back to desired and undesired outcomes. If you intervene in the context of a user in order to poke the system and see how it reacts, and if that's a reaction which is beneficial to the user because it might solve his problem, then before you poke there and see what kind of reaction it might be, you need to inventory a little bit the desired and undesired outcomes. So we do that in our design work too. However, we of course by poking find new desired and undesired outcomes. Or you could also say we find unintended consequences if you look a bit from systems thinking perspective. And this is why the prototyping or the going starting with something helps us uncover these. So that's the only thing that comes to mind now when I think about your question. And again, there we are with this co-evolution of problem and solution space. And in Job to be Done, I sometimes saw the tendency to really inventory everything upfront and not have these cycles of poking the system and intervening in the context and see how it reacts and find jobs to be done that might have been hidden because you haven't poked. I don't know if that makes sense, but that comes to mind.
Makes total sense, and I believe actually if you can kind of mix up these two approaches, and you can get a really powerful result. You at some point you're going to think about what are the desired outcomes, then you make a test, and then you update them. And I think having that kind of loop, I think jobs to be done with agile methodologies in general is a pretty good idea.
Well, one thing that certainly that would bring to light working with the prototype or what we would call consumption jobs. Just a quick example. So I've got my phone here. So we all have probably access to our finances on our phone. So if you think about two outcomes, minimize the time to access my financial data. Right. So that would be purely what we want to accomplish, right? Minimize the time to access my financial data. Also, we'd have security. We'd have a lot of other things. But as soon as you hand me this, now I have consumption jobs with using it. Like, well, before that, with learning to use it, how do I figure out how to do this? And then with actually using it, like how long does it, what actually do I do? Is it confusing? And so if you hand this to me, then now I'm going to respond to this thing, right? Which could be different, which is a different thing, and actually how quickly it helps you to do it, if you knew to do it, if that makes sense. So that's the category of outcomes. It occurs to me that the new outcomes is not so much about the core thing you want to accomplish as much as interfacing with this thing. I can't figure out what to do, or I'm shaking it, or I can't remember my password, or all these other things interacting with it. But so that's one thing that jobs to be done would separate the core function that it does plus what we would call consumptions for working with whatever the device is. That makes sense. I'm just curious, with design thinking, do you separate those, or is it those kind of all together? And does that distinction make sense? First of all, I should ask.
Yeah, I would have to need it more understand it more. I would have to understand it more in detail. I'm not sure if I can really give an answer that makes sense on that. I mean, these from your last episodes, I heard about the core consumption jobs, but I don't know. I'm unsure.
Yeah. So we separate the core function of what the thing helps you to do.
Yes.
All right. That's one category, and then another. So let me give a different example. So if so, mowing the lawn. Sorry, my background's John Deere, so I go to mowing the lawn. So the core functional job is mowing the lawn. And if you're trying to understand if you wanted to improve your ability to do that, then you'd look at how uneven the grass is, and you look at these qualities of how well the lawn is mowed. Right?
Yes.
Now, as soon as I hand you a mower to use, now I'm getting a different set of outcomes around steering and operating the machine,
operating and turning it on,
storing the machine and repairing the machine. All these are different than how nice that lawn is after. So the two differences is, one is the core functional job is how well is that job done, meaning how beautiful is my lawn, if you will. And then the other one is jobs using this product, using this machine. So if I give you a push mower, I'm going to get a different set of needs. It changes by solution. I'm gonna get a different set of needs than if you have a robot mower where you're just programming it in and it goes, versus something you try.
Yes.
So does that distinction make better sense now?
Yes, that totally makes sense. It's you zoom in from what the thing generally does for you to how it's during usage. Then you can zoom out or go before you start using it into the sales journey, so to speak. And there are all these different jobs depending on which level you look at. In my very easy words.
Is this the find cheap airfares quickly comment that you're trying to that we talked about with Jim Kalbach? It's that idea, no? That jobs to be done separates the metric, so the desired outcomes, from the job, which is the goal you're trying to achieve. So.
Well, here's the difference. By the way, I am undefeated in confusing people on this point. I'm glad that as I've taught it, so I'm glad to know my streak continues. Here's one key difference, a way to separate them. The core job does not mention the solution, even though mow the lawn, that's kind of solution, but that's because you're presuming that. But so it's solution. So minimize the time to access my financial data. You don't know if it's a computer. You don't know if I could be driving to the bank and asking the banker, how much money do I have? So it's completely solution independent. Consumption jobs refer to a solution. So now minimize the time to punch in the code, or minimize you have all these things about, you refer to the device as opposed to
now I get it.
Minimizing the time to access my financial data does not refer to anything at all. That's probably maybe a more clear way to describe that.
Yes. So let's translate it. Let's translate it to design thinking practice. The core job to be done, to have this English moan, that must be really beautiful. I can refer to my parents there. That's their job. I even had a talk about that once. This can be achieved by different solutions. There can come the gardener, they can have the robot, they can have a sheep, they can have whatever. Then there's difference up and downsides to the solution I choose, and those we test then. Oh, and by the way, we phrase then this core job to be done into how might we question, of course, and then we brainstorm around it. How might we create an English mown or an English garden for, and then insert persona here, in a way that, and then include the constraints, because constraints increase excitement. So that would be the thing. But then if we go to the solution, this could be the sheep. Then suddenly we have all these
feeding the sheep, storing the sheep, keeping the sheep dying. It's a different list than if they're using a robot or a service.
Yep.
And I mentioned this, it seems significant with design thinking because of this iterative back end, right? Because at some point you are committing to some solution form. So if you're bringing the customers a sheet, you're not going to get needs about updating the software on the robot, right?
Here's the thing.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, go ahead.
This is why we always find these so-called design principles. Because if we observe our users in their context, we see that, for example, they might have no electricity around there, or that whatever the solution is, it needs to be totally silent because they're in an environment where it's not allowed to create value with a device that makes sounds. I really like the concept of affordances here. Just to give an example before I go on further with it. You can create value with a camera in a church if there's a wedding. It's totally fine and appropriate to take photos. Now I switch context by just changing one thing, namely the event. It's Beerdigung. What's the English word?
Funeral.
It's a funeral. Thank you. It's a funeral. Suddenly, it's inappropriate to take photos, except maybe for the photograph. So you have the same device, but you cannot create value with it. And you could even look at this. Context might also change even the jobs to be done of solutions. So to come back, we call that design principles in design thinking or in designer language, where we say whatever the solution might be, it has to fulfill these principles. And this can be a set of 3 or 4, the less the merrier, but sometimes it can also be 50. But it's very confusing. So it's usually, I don't know, from 4 to 12 or something like this. And this answers then probably maybe a little bit your question on how we arrive in choosing a solution, because we gathered the design principles and sometimes we also find them by intervening with a certain prototype in a context and realizing, we haven't thought about that. It shouldn't make too much noise. I worked, for example, with a team and they created a device for farmers, and then it made too much noise and that made the chicken the chicken went wild because of that, and so they couldn't put it next to a chicken barn, and they learned that and they realized, okay, either we can't put it there, but it's usually the way it's put, so we have to do something else. And that's then a design principle. A certain decibel cannot be reached.
So these are kind
maybe
of like,
that answer.
is that, if I understand correctly, so you're within either the beginning or during the process, you kind of uncover almost like the constraints around the solutions. Like you predefine certain things that the solution to be found out has to fulfill.
Exactly.
Okay.
And here's the thing: you would call that the metric, because in the end, this can be a metric. It needs to be silent. So when does the customer know that the solution works for him? If it's silent enough for this environment.
Yeah. But it's also, I think, in jobs, I mean, how we applied. So it's very hard to be completely solution free. And I don't think in most of the cases that actually makes sense. So I think even if we do it unconsciously sometimes, but we try to make this decision as conscious as possible, that at the beginning of a project you define in a broad sense, but you still need to define the solution space in a certain sense. But it's a myth that people just go out there and find whatever user needs and then build a green field where I've never in my life have I see. Okay, I'm not that old, but still. So Scott is nodding. So probably you have. I mean, that's not how it works. You have a set of solution constraints in a certain sense, and you go from there. And I think it's very important in jobs we done that we do this, but do this consciously. So that you're calling this design principles or however you want to call it, but we make this decision consciously in the framing phase, as we would call this. But when you do it consciously, you have to know you're excluding certain possible solutions, but you're including another. So I think that is something. Again, maybe it's important to be solution free in a certain sense, but it's in no way can you be completely solution free, I believe.
Right. If your company makes robots, you're not going to start selling sheep. I mean, right. I mean, that becomes, and to some degree, like in jobs we've done, I think, we adhere tightly to, I hate to even use the word ideology, but whatever it is. And then it's almost like we suspend our common sense a little bit, where I think that with I'm just gross generalization here, but the design thinking practitioner does not give up, does not set their common sense aside. It's just sort of it's always there. And we have to come back around to it. But, but it's almost like, I think how a jobs to be done practitioner would defend it is like, well, I have to know the rules, but then I can break them. I know the rules, and but even in my example, mow the lawn. There's actually mowing. I mean, actually, even I broke my own rule in a way.
Make the lawn or
but it
have
was
a
not
beautiful
ridiculous
lawn.
to go to a customer and say, "Tell me your challenge is shortening the grass." I mean, it just
nobody talks that way.
Nobody talks that way. That's
too abstract.
Exactly. So you have to we think in these abstract terms. Then we have to sort of intentionally bring our common sense back in. They're mowing the grass, come back down to it. But anyway, I thought it just seemed, well, let me mention this too. I thought it was when repetition and iteration at the end was so important. That's why I felt like that was, at least that was worth drawing out, the type of information that you would uncover there. Oh, and now I've lost my train of thought. Oh, I know what I was going to say. I think with jobs to be done practitioners, we often think of sort of the end as we've delivered this prioritized set of needs. Very common. And clearly with design thinking, you're just getting started. You're the ideation, the moving forward, prototyping, and I think that's something well, even if a client if you just hand them over this beautiful set of perfect prioritized needs, they've absolutely struggle to know what to do with it. And I see certainly a great benefit to your clients is it's the project. You're still with them through those cycles. And I think that's something probably the average jobs to be done practitioner could learn from design thinking. And of course, that's a lot what we're looking for. Like, what can we learn from? I think that's
And if you boil it down, being human-centric, which is what you are too, and prototype and test to learn, that would be if I were to explain it to my kids, my easy definition of design thinking, not as complicated as the one that I mentioned before. But also comes to mind, I mean, we worked with a client and they did some fancy stuff, Industry 4.0 with AI and blah, blah, blah. I'm not allowed to talk about that, but if you zoom back in time, you can compare it with a story that I just recently heard, which was really funny. There was a problem with empty packages of toothpaste all the time in a factory on the conveyor belt, and then customers were dissatisfied. And they wanted to get rid of it. So in terms of total quality management, they built a scale, which cost some million. And the scale would weigh the package. And if it was too easy, it would be sorted out, or too lightweight, and otherwise it would go on. And that was classical over-engineering. And after a while, the defection rate, or the rate of these packages that were not at the right weight, was zero, and they asked themselves, "How come? Why?" And then they realized that the intern or was a helper role there that had to then sort them out later all the time, was not automated for some reason. Found a nice solution to that because he put a ventilator a bit more up front in the conveyor belt that would vent down or through the wind these empty boxes, so he wouldn't have to go there all the time to the scale whenever the scale rings the signal. And why do I say that? Because we realize that in design thinking projects, if you are solution free or try to approach something solution free, even though you know that you have industry constraints that you were mentioning, Scott. You know it, and I'm a robot builder. Something has to do with robots later on, whatever I build here, or with software. There might be teams that discover something which is totally different, maybe a manual service or something, or a consulting business, and they might leave the company and just build this thing. This happens. And what also happens is in big corporates, multinationals with different business units, that when you are in a program where you create new businesses, like a venture builder or something, that you create something that is not part of your business unit anymore, and you need a new target business unit. And then they need to find someone who adopts them, because suddenly it's all about software and not about building a big machine anymore. So we have that all the time. So it's a side effect of thinking solution free and having a free challenge. And even if you come back then to your old trade and to what you do as a core competency, giving yourself the space to freak out, that's how I would call it, and have fun and think totally into a direction which might be very unrealistic is a really important part of the creative process, because the ridiculous stuff that you come up with there sometimes gives the impetus and the spark for the more realistic stuff later on to come back. And this, unfortunately,
sorry, I was going back to it. I love your phrase as you began with, build to learn. That makes sense to me. You think with your hands, and then that would just, your brain would work better, I would think.
Yeah. But I agree. I mean, I had once a discussion. I unfortunately can't remember the name. And then, and they were, so he was an innovation manager at a London-based company. And then he said, well, 20% of the innovation projects that I oversee are completely crazy. We're not going to do anything with those. They don't add any business value. We know we're never going to act upon this. And then I asked him, like, what are you doing? Like, you're wasting money that's inefficient, blah, blah, blah. And he said, well, the point of these things is something else. The point is showing the company what's possible, showing the people that we support this kind of thinking. And then it's to use a jargon in a sense, it's a different job that these 20% of innovation projects are hired for. So there I completely understand that can be an enormously important thing to do in a company, just to have a certain space where it's okay to go for crazy ideas because it has an impact on the other 80%.
Exactly. And the lateral thinking and the cross-pollination that later happens when these teams talk to other teams who are more on the core business or on adjacent business opportunities can move the needle.
So at the beginning, I said we wanted to take a break, which we in the end didn't do. And but I think it's very okay. I would be really interested. You touched upon it. You said you cannot talk about it, but can you? And you mentioned this in discussions we had before. So can you talk a little bit more about really Codify? What do you do there? What are you mentioned also that there is much. I mean, there is part of it is design thinking, but there is also kind of lean that you figured. What do you do there? What is Codify all about? So that we have a kind of an impression of this as well.
Yes. Okay. Well, that's the thing. We started out of the network from the HPI, of course. I gained that many friends over the years, and I was really happy about that. And together we did lots of projects. And also, I would say that also brought me more into, because also during my studies and so on and so forth, I did more the real project work. We worked on products with startups, for example. But then when I entered the HPI, I went more and more into this learning experience design. That was not something that I was familiar before with. I did workshops, but not as professional as there. I learned quite a lot, especially also from Holger Reno.
Yeah.
And so what we did then, of course, was lots of training. I don't know how many trainings we did. All these typical design thinking boost camps, but also we did leadership trainings around what actually design leadership means, and so on and so forth. However, so this I would say that made in the beginning 80% of what we did, and less project work. That was our slider back then. That changed a little bit later because we always did that usually as subcontractors for big consultancies. Or for the HPI itself. Okay. And I had several reasons why I wanted my own clients, and also the people with whom we founded Codify, Ingo Raut in the beginning and other people. We wanted to build up our own clients where the mandate and the setup, how we work with the client is different, because unfortunately we have been part of lots of innovation theater. I have to admit that. So we went into lots of organizations, or had to go there, and prematurely scale their design thinking activities. Yeah? I mean, I had so weird jobs. I even wrote a post-legitimization line of reasoning for a DAX company once that they needed after they introduced design thinking after some years, and everyone asked, "Why do we do that again?" And they did not have an answer for that, and so I was part of that. So it's crazy what happened there, and we thought, no, we have to do it differently because during our time at the HPI, when we did the study, we had contact with lots of very inspiring vanguard organizations that scaled design thinking, and not only design thinking, because design thinking never comes alone, also lean startup and Scrum and other agile approaches in a very clever way. And they did so by changing the system, the innovation system, that's at least how I call it. And we knew all that. We knew which things work well context agnostically. We knew which things you can't just copy and paste. And so we thought, whenever we want to work with someone, we at least want to try to not just jump in another project that then will totally bog down by the organization because they don't have a good venture creation pipeline established. Usually they have stage gates and new product development processes, which are very anti-design thinking and lean startup. And this is why we thought with Codify we could do that. And then we were so naive to think we could do that with the German mechanical engineering companies, the bigger ones. We still call them Mittelstand, like SMEs, but they have 5 to 20,000 employees.
They're huge.
So they're huge. So I don't know why we call them Mittelstand, but they are really huge. And we thought because this is the core of the German economy and we wanted to do something there, they are laggards when it comes to digitalization. Let's work with them. Boy, were we naive. I mean, I love to work with engineers. I have such a big, we at Codify in general, we have such a big heart for engineers. And they are so, I mean, it's lots of fun. However, what we realized is we have to take it very slow. Especially with going in there systemically and co-evolving. There we have the co-evolution again. The training of people, let's say in design thinking, business design, lean startup, and other things. But in the meantime, creating the conditions so that they can really apply what they've learned. And then on the meantime, creating the environment that these projects can move through the pipeline. It's really tough because there are so many things you will have to touch. And it's also the longer, this is why I said in the very beginning, sometimes I wonder how I ended up here. I mean, I started with working on things, and now I'm working more on and we as Codify in general, we work more on trying to help makers to unfold their potential in the environments they are. Sometimes we say we don't fish for you anymore. We only teach to fish, or we help you to build the fisher's hut. Is that the right word? Yeah. And the gear.
Okay.
So this is what we do with Codify. And it's tough. It's tough, but it's fun.
Usually those two go together. Oh, sorry, don't go on.
Yeah, you say on your website, over the years, we realized two things. Now, intermediaries often did only share aspects of our thinking and working philosophy. Thus, we found ourselves in lots of innovation theater and the promotion of quick fix recipes, as well as management fashions. Furthermore, the organizations we were deployed to rarely had innovation support structures in place to make both training as well as project work a success for the long term.
Yes, exactly like this. Exactly like this. And the real story behind it is even crazier because in terms of general life goals, my business partner Chris and I, and also Elias and Ingo, we would like to live in a world. It's again this. What's our purpose and so on and so forth. In a greener Europe, but also in a world that really is more sustainable. And my business partner Chris, he's a big expert in circular economy, things like that. So, and also our current biggest client is RockTech, first European or German, I don't know if it's first European, and maybe even Europe, first European lithium hydroxide converter. And we think about how this business model can be circular. Chris does that at least. So these are the things we want to work at. And we always thought we have a big leverage at these companies that have a big raw material input and output. So we could help them close their material loops and develop business models around it. And then you need lots of service design and service dominant logic thinking, things like that. The problem is that we realize, they don't think business model, they think product. Okay, so we have to change that, intervene there. Then realize, they can't think that because their teams are dysfunctional or they have too much silos or then we had to intervene in that and so on and so forth. So first we need to prepare these companies, but they can't be prepared, and it's very unlikely that such business models which are beneficial for future generations will emerge if the whole system is geared against these innovators that will build them. So we have to change the system. But then you ask yourself, okay, so how many years do I still have before I retire? And with whom do I attack these things? Yeah. So that's that's my personal way how I ended up there, and I ended up as the architect. Somehow, that's at least how they call me internally. Whereas other people at Codify, Ingo has become a leadership coach, whereas Chris still is doing more the business design work, whereas I do that only rarely. So I totally left this field.
Yeah.
Or only do it maybe once a year or something like this.
I think it's very fitting that kind of codify your roles, how you understand yourself also is kind of changing all the time. I just think that's just, if it would be otherwise, I would be really surprised. So, and by the way, I have to mention this. I really love, you in general, I think Codify as well, as much as you can. You really do. You build as much as you can in public. You share. You're really quite honest and transparent. So go on the website, go on whatever, and you just share a lot, which I really appreciate. It's also something we believe in heavily, that just share your stuff. We all want to kind of lift the boats, or I don't know what the expression really is, but you know what I mean. So
there's an old expression, see if I can remember this: give away your best and then sell the rest.
I like that one. Yeah, I would love to do that more. I'm happy that you say that, Jan, because I just started recently, because there was also a time when we had no time at all for all of these because of private things and so on and so forth. Sure. So I hope to write more in the future. Yeah, even more.
Well, the truth is, most companies, folks there, product managers, leaders, they are not and don't want to be deep experts in a lot of these things. They've got other things they're doing. So, as it's, and if some of them want to become experts and take it internally, great. Well, we're usually happy to help them do that. In fact, we love that. I think, in fact, that makes things a lot better. But, I don't think there's a lot to be gained by trying to control and try to hide, keep everything secret. You don't, I don't know. It's just sort of philosophically, I enjoy thinking about things, writing about things, getting things out there, and then having great conversations like this today, just to better learn. And after, we're all going to die one day, we can't take it all with us. So yeah,
that's true. And also, your thoughts are only refined if someone challenges this. That's why I like Jonathan's approach there, saying, I want to find reasons against jobs to be done. I would also like to find reasons against what I'm doing and writing, because only then you can see if it really truly stands the test of time or of practice.
Yeah. For Jonathan, you have to watch out. I'm sure he has 2 or 3 questions there on his paper where he will crush design thinking and jobs to be done. So, but he's too polite to ask. So.
No, well, I did have one, but I think the moment has passed.
I knew it. I honestly, I told you that we did this therapeutic study. So I'm totally at ease with it now. So crush it.
Perfect. So I think that's kind of a perfect place to end this. thank you so much, Jan, for doing this. Very pleasant discussion, very engaging. I love to learn more about design thinking. It's something I really enjoy because, as Scott mentioned, it's something I think where jobs to be done can learn from as well. So thank you so much for doing this. That concludes today's Product Quest podcast. Thank you so much for joining us, and thanks to you, of course, Jan, again. Please send any comments, guest or topic recommendations or ideas for any future shows to productquestpodcast@gmail.com. See you next time.
John, I think you all have the same name.
Yes.
Oh, that's true.
I think I'm the only weirdo.